यशोदानन्दन व्रज जनरञ्जन यमुना तेरा वनचारी यमुना तेरा वनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे जय गौरांगी बेंगलोरेश्वर गौरांगी बेंगलोरेश्वर गौरांगी जय जगन्नाथ जय बलदेवा सुभद्रा माये जय सुदर्शन जय गौरनिताय गौरनिताय जय गौरनिताय जय जय प्रभुपाद जय जय प्रभुपाद निताय गौर हरि बोल निताय गौर हरि बोल हरिनाम संकीर्तनम की जय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय नारायणं नमस्कृत्यं नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत् नष्टप्रायेषु भद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवयां भगवते उत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी। Hare Krishna, we welcome devotees for today morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. So we are reading from chapter number 22 of fourth canto. Prithu Maharaj meets Sanat Kumaras, verse number 34 and 35. न कुर्यात् कर्ह्य चेत् सङ्गम् तमस्तीव्रं तितिर्षिषुः धर्मार्थकाममोक्षाणाम् यदन्य विघातकम् न कुर्यात् कर्ह्य चेत् सङ्गम् तमस्तीव्रं तितिर्षुः धर्मार्थकाममोक्षाणां यदत्यन्तविघातकम् तत्रापि मोक्ष एवार्थ आत्यन्तिकतयेष्यते त्रैवर्ग्योऽर्थयतो नित्यम् कृतान्तयुतः तत्रापि मोक्ष एवार्थ आत्यन्तिकतयेष्यते त्रैवर्ग्योऽर्थयतो नित्यम् कृतान्तभयसंयुतः. Word to word translation of the first verse. Na, do not. Kuryat, act. Karhichid, at any time. Sangam, association. Tamaha, ignorance. Tivram, with great speed. Titirishuhu, persons who desire to cross over nescience. Dharma, religion. Artha, economic development. Kama, sense gratification. Mokshanam, of salvation. Yet, that which. Atyanta, very much. Vighatakam, obstruction or stumbling block. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Those who strongly desire to cross the ocean of nescience must not associate with the modes of ignorance, for hedonistic activities are the greatest obstructions to realization of religious principles, economic development, regulated sense gratification, and at last, liberation. Purport. The four principles of life allow one to live according to religious principles, to earn money according to one's position in society, to allow the senses to enjoy the sense objects according to regulations, and to progress along the path of liberation from this material attachment. As long as the body is there, it is not possible to become completely free from all these material interests. It is not, however, recommended that one act only for sense gratification and earn money for that purpose only, sacrificing all religious principles. At the present moment, human civilization does not care for religious principles. It is, however, greatly interested in economic development without religious principles. For instance, in a slaughterhouse, the butchers certainly get money easily, but such business is not based on religious principles. Similarly, there are many nightclubs for sense gratification and brothels for sex. Sex, of course, is allowed in married life, but prostitution is prohibited because all our activities are ultimately aimed at liberation, at freedom from the clutches of material existence. Similarly, although the government may license liquor shops, this does not mean that liquor shops should be opened unrestrictedly and illicit liquor smuggled. Licensing is meant for restriction. No one has to take a license for sugar, wheat, or milk because there is no need to restrict these things. In other words, it is advised that one not act in a way that will obstruct the regular process of advancement in spiritual life and liberation. The Vedic process of sense gratification is therefore planned in such a way that one can economically develop and enjoy sense gratification and yet ultimately attain liberation. Vedic civilization offers us all knowledge in the Shastras, and if we live a regulated life under the direction of Shastras and Guru, all our material desires will be fulfilled. At the same time, we will be able to go forward to liberation. Verse number 35. Translation. Out of the four principles, namely religion, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation, liberation has to be taken very seriously. The other three are subject to destruction by the stringent law of nature, death. Purport. Moksha or liberation has to be taken very seriously, even at the sacrifice of the other three items. As advised by Suta Goswami in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, religious principles are not based on success in economic development. Because we are very attached to sense gratification, we go to God, to temple or churches for some economic reasons. Then again, economic development does not mean sense gratification. Everything should be adjusted in such a way that we attain liberation. Therefore, in this verse, liberation, moksha, is stressed. The other three items are material and therefore subject to destruction. Even if somehow we accumulate a great bank balance in this life and possess many material things, everything will be finished with death. In Bhagavad Gita, it is said that death is the supreme personality of Godhead who ultimately takes away everything acquired by materialistic person. Foolishly, we do not care for this. Foolishly, we are not afraid of death, nor do we consider that death will take away everything acquired by the process of dharma, artha, and kama. By dharma or pious activities, we may be elevated to the heavenly planets, but this does not mean freedom from clutches of birth, death, old age, and disease. The purport is that we can sacrifice our interest in Trivargya, religious principles, economic development, and sense gratification, but we cannot sacrifice the cause of liberation. Regarding liberation, it is stated in Bhagavad Gita 4.9, Tyaktva deham punarjanmam naiti. Liberation means that after giving up this body, one does not have to accept another material body. To the impersonalist, liberation means merging into the existence of impersonal Brahman. But factually, this is not moksha because one has to again fall down to the material world from the impersonal position. One should therefore seek the shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and engage in his devotional service. That is real liberation. The conclusion is that we should not stress pious activities, economic development, and sense gratification, but should concern ourselves with approaching Lord Vishnu in his spiritual planets, of which the topmost is Golok Vrindavan, where Lord Krishna lives. Therefore, this Krishna consciousness movement is the greatest gift for persons who are actually desiring liberation. ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपः कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरोः श्रीयुतापदकमलं श्रीगुरोन् श्रीवैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातां सहगणा रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधाकृष्णपादान् सहगणा ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिति नामिने। नमस्ते सारस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे। नमो महावदन्याय कृष्णप्रेमप्रदायते कृष्णाय कृष्णचैतन्य नामिने गौरत्विषे नमः। हे कृष्णा करुणा सिन्धु दीनबन्धु जगत्पते गोपीश गोपिका कान्त राधा कान्त नमोस्तुते। तप्तकाञ्चन गौराङ्गी राधे वृन्दावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. Once again, we welcome all devotees for today morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. So we are discussing the section of Srimad Bhagavatam in 4th canto, chapter number 22, where Prithu Maharaj is meeting the Sanat Kumaras, and Sanat Kumaras who have blessed Prithu Maharaj with their association as promised by Lord Vishnu when he appeared in the sacrifice, when he appeared, when Prithu Maharaj decided to stop the 100th sacrifice. So here Prithu Maharaj is speaking to the Sanat Kumaras. So we are discussing this particular section, a very deep section where Sanat Kumaras are speaking about a process of devotional service, how even a person who is inclined to sinful activities can arise to the platform of devotional service by associating with devotees, and so on and so forth. So I seek the blessings of all Vaishnavas here so that I can speak something for the glorification of the Lord and purification of my heart. So in this particular verse, verse number 34 and 35, Sanat Kumaras are speaking about how people are immersed in the modes of ignorance, are attached to hedonistic activities. So what is hedonistic activity? Hedonism means mad pursuit of pleasure without any consideration of whether it is right or wrong. So who is pursuing for pleasure in this world? Everyone is pursuing for pleasure in this world. Every living entity born in any of the 84 lakh species of life that exists is pursuing for pleasure, is pursuing to increase pleasure and decrease its pain. It does not want to experience death. It does not want to be forced into experiencing disease. It does not want to be forced into a body that is old and invalid. It does not want to be forced into a position of changing its bodies again and again. It does not want to be experiencing Adhyatmika, Adibhautika and Adidavika Klesha. And it is in pursuit of pleasure. Every living entity. So the question may arise, why are living entities in pursuit of pleasure in the first place? See, living entities are so mad in pursuit of pleasure that sometimes they lose their power of discrimination in identifying what is correct and what is wrong during their pursuit of pleasure. So what forces a living entity to pursue pleasure? It is the nature of the living entity. The Vedanta Sutra says, Anandamayo Bhyasat. The living entity is ultimately looking for pleasure, and therefore every living entity in this world is looking for pleasure, and we look for pleasure because that is our nature. But in the hunt for pleasure, we get an experience that is very painful. Now it is contradictory, right? Living entities of this world are endeavoring for experiencing pleasure, but in the endeavor for experiencing pleasure, what they are experiencing is pain. For example, a camel, do you know what is the favorite food for a camel? The tastiest food that it relishes the most. It is thorny bushes. It is cactus. So a camel bites the cactus and relishes a cactus as if it were nectarian juice. What is the camel experiencing there? The camel does not even understand that the thorns of the cactus are pricking its palate, because of which blood is oozing from its mouth, and it is ultimately releasing the blood that it is itself drinking, that is oozing from its own mouth. So in the pursuit of pleasure, the living entity experiences pain without even knowing that it is experiencing pain. Very amazing, right? The living entity wants to experience pleasure, and in the pursuit of pleasure, the living entity is experiencing pain in such a way that it does not even know that it is experiencing pain. And that's why Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Yei samsparshaja bhoga dukkha yonyaiva evate adyantavanta kaunteya nateshu ramate Buddha. Intelligent people, Buddha, they don't relish in such kind of pleasure. In pleasures that is coated with, in which is actually pain, that is coated with one layer of pleasure. So intelligent people do not endeavor for this kind of pleasure, and in the experience for achieving this pleasure or gratifying their senses, they end up experiencing pain. And even if they experience so-called pleasure that is relishable for the senses, it is ultimately temporary. And not only it is temporary, the pursuit for pleasure and the taste of pleasure increases the addiction towards pleasure. And neither does this pleasure, which is real, which is illusory, satisfies the living entity. And therefore, the living entity should abandon this concept of pursuit of pleasure. But it is extremely difficult for the living entity who has been attempting to endeavor for pleasure for so many millions of lifetimes to give it up altogether at a time. Because the living entity is in this material world for many, many millions of lifetimes. Asankheya, many lifetimes. And in all these lifetimes, the living entity has endeavored for pursuing pleasure. So, for a living entity to give up that pursuit of pleasure, all of a sudden is not possible. And therefore, the Shastras have given us regulative principles by which we can purify our desire for pleasure. So, among those people who pursue pleasure, so we discussed who pursue pleasure. Every living entity actually is in pursuit of pleasure, and these living entities can be divided in human form of life into 4 different categories. Every human being is in pursuit of pleasure, and these people who are in pursuit of pleasure, which is practically everyone, can be divided into 4 categories. The first one are those people who are in pursuit of pleasure without any regard for Vedic injunctions, which means they do not consider what is sinful and what is correct. They simply want to pursue pleasure head on. They are called as vikarmis. Vikarmis are those people whose ultimate goal is pleasure without any regulations, without any restrictions, and without any consideration of whether that pursuit of pleasure is right or wrong. And such kind of people are called as vikarmis. Better than vikarmis are those people called karmis, who are also in pursuit of pleasure. Karmis are also in pursuit of pleasure, but they have discriminative mentality in following the Vedic injunctions, so that they pursue pleasure according to the Vedas. Vikarmis are those people who don't consider the injunctions of the Vedas only. They outright head-on collide with Maya for pursuit of pleasure. But the second category people, karmis, are those who also want to pursue pleasure, but they want to pursue pleasure in a sinless way, in a way that is regulated by the Vedas. Now, what is the problem with the first category people, that is vikarmis? Even though they are pursuing for pleasure, because they are pursuing for pleasure in a way that is not sanctioned by the Vedas, their endeavor for pleasure does not give them pleasure or does not give them satisfaction. Because for one to experience happiness in this world, it is possible only through religious injunctions. And that's why the system of Purusharthas exist: Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. The living entities are in pursuit of pleasure. But for the living entities to pursue pleasure in a righteous way, the living entities have to perform religious activities. Vratas, yagnas, yagas, pujas, karmakandi rituals, so that by pursuit of these religious activities, one may get pleasure that is satisfying for one's heart. That is some amount of satisfaction. But what happens when people pursue pleasure without any regulation for religious scriptures? That pleasure does not even give the basic satisfaction that is intended from the pursuit of the pleasure. And therefore, we see in this world, people earn in crores. In Western countries and today even in India, people earn in crores. But that crores of rupees that they earn cannot give simple satisfaction in their life, because the wealth that they are accumulating is not by dharmic means. And because the wealth is not coming from dharma or religious duties, such kind of wealth cannot fulfill one's desires or cannot even give kama. And that is a problem with vikarmis, because vikarmis are pursuing pleasure without the regulations of Vedic literatures. They cannot experience even the basic satisfaction that is intended from the pursuit of the pleasure. And karmis, because they engage themselves in religious activities, they can fulfill their desires from the wealth that is arising from this dharma, that is artha. But does that mean they can experience pleasure for all time to come? No, because the nature of pleasure itself is temporary. Whether it is acquired in an adharmic way or a dharmic way, the nature of the pleasure itself is temporary. And when a karmi endeavors for millions of lifetimes, accumulates punya, goes to heaven, then kshine punye martilokam vishanti, again accumulates punya, goes to heaven, then kshine punya martyalokam vishanti. And when karmi entangles in this cycle for many many lifetimes, then he realizes that by mere pursuit of pleasure, whether it is dharmic or adharmic, one cannot attain satisfaction in one's life, and therefore he starts pursuing for moksha, dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. And that is where he gives up the three other purusharthas, that is dharma, artha, and kama, wherein he endeavors for moksha, that is liberation. But here there is a problem. Even if one gets liberated through the pursuit of the process of jnana or yoga, because one has not awakened or one has not tasted the highest form of pleasure which exists in the service to the Supreme Lord, he once again comes down to the lower forms of pleasure. He once again comes down to lower forms of pleasure. And therefore, because he does not experience higher taste in service to the Supreme Lord, in glorification of the Supreme Lord, but he wants to experience some kind of pleasure. Therefore, he ultimately comes down to the material platform again. So, the Vedic literature actually gives us these principles of dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, so that we purify our tendency for sense gratification. And through the process of purification of our tendency for the sense gratification, we can come to the platform of moksha. But Srimad Bhagavatam even rejects the idea of moksha. Why? Because Srimad Bhagavatam says that although dharma, artha, kama, mokshas are recommended, purusharthas, the pursuit of pleasure through the purusharthas is recommended in all Vedic literatures. Srimad Bhagavatam says, dharmasya hi apavargasya narto yascheha karmabhi, which means Srimad Bhagavatam says, dharmasya hi apavargasya. Dharma is not meant for artha and artha is not meant for kama. Dharma is meant for apavarga, which means liberation only directly. So people in this world perform religious activities, pujas, vratas, yajnas, so that they can attain wealth, and from that wealth they can do sense gratification or fulfill their desires. But Srimad Bhagavatam says the purpose of dharmic activities or religious activities is not sense gratification. Dharmasya hi apavargasya narto arthaya kalpate nartasya dharmaikantasya kamo labhaya hi smrita. Srimad Bhagavatam says dharmasya hi apavargasya, which means dharma is not for artha. All the religious activities recommended in the Vedic literatures which karmis actually do so that they can attain wealth and they can fulfill their desires is actually not meant for attaining wealth. And wealth, even if attained, wealth, nartasya hi dharmaikantasya kamo labhaya hi smita, which means wealth, even attained, should not be used for fulfilling our sense gratification. Rather, dharma, artha, and kama, whatever it exists, should be utilized for what? For attaining the highest thing, that is moksha. So Srimad Bhagavatam says dharma is not meant for artha and artha is not meant for kama, whereas dharma, artha, and kama, all three are meant for apavarga. And what is apavarga? Apavarga means over the parishram, fena, and bhaya, mrityu, pa, fa, ba, ba, ma, this pavarga, which means toiling for something that is available anyways in material form of life. Toiling for that happiness that is anyway available freely. So Srimad Bhagavatam strongly says in the second chapter only that all occupational duties are certainly meant for ultimate liberation. And even sense gratification, kamasya nendriya priti labho jiveta yavata jivasya tattva jignasa narto yascheha karmabhi. Life's desires should never be directed for sense gratification. Rather, life's desire should be directed for something that is unattainable even in all the 14 planetary systems. That's why Narad Muni tells Vyasdev in Srimad Bhagavatam, tasyaiva heto prayate kovido nalabhyate yad brahmatam uparyada tallabhyate yad dukkavad danyata sukam kalena sarvatra gabhira ramasa. So Narad Muni is telling Vyasdev, Tasyaiva heto prayateta kovido. Intelligent people are those who do not endeavor for that happiness which is available in all the 14 planetary systems, but they endeavor for that happiness which is beyond the 14 planetary systems. Because the happiness within the 14 planetary systems is available to any form of living entity without any endeavor. So they are not worth endeavoring for. So in the pursuit of happiness, if the living entity gets entangled in dharma meant for artha and artha meant for kama, it is losing the purpose of purusharthas. The purusharthas are meant to elevate the living entity to come to a platform wherein he should aspire for liberation, moksha. But the process of purification through purusharthas is a process that takes many, many millions of lifetimes. Because as one engages in in religious duties meant for sense gratification, so what happens? Because he is indulging in sense gratification, it takes a lot of time for him to purify. But for one who understands that religious duties are not meant for sense gratification and performs his religious duties with an aspiration for liberation, such a person can purify himself in a very faster rate. So Prahlad Maharaj says in Srimad Bhagavatam to the Daityas that one should not endeavor for that happiness. Sukham Aindriyakam Yattat. Sukham Aindriyakam Yattat. Yeah, Prahlad Maharaj says Sukham Aindriyakam Yattat, where this happiness, one should not endeavor for that particular happiness that is anyway available freely. Just as distress is available to us. Sukham Maindrekam Daitya Dehi Yogena Dehinam Sarvatra Labate Daivat Yatha Dukkam Ayatnataha. So, just as miseries are available in one's life without any invitation, similarly, happiness is also available. Therefore, such kind of pursuit for pleasure is not laudable. Whereas, one should pursue for serving the Supreme Lord. So, among the four kinds of people who we discussed, that are pursuing pleasure, that is the vikarmis who pursue pleasure without any regulation for religious literatures, then karmis who pursue pleasure by performing religious duties, by accumulating wealth through that religious duties, and by undergoing sense gratification through that wealth. They are engaging themselves in dharma, artha and kama, and for many millions of lifetimes as they engage that, they develop frustration for these activities because they find these activities does not give them ultimate pleasure. So they aspire for moksha, wherein they look towards the path of jnana to get themselves liberated from all kinds of activities. But the problem with moksha is, even after one attains moksha, because one has not awakened the taste for loving devotional service to the Supreme Lord, he hankers for some taste of sense gratification and ultimately falls down to this world. And then there are yogis who aspires to control matter through the process of attaining siddhis, anima, lagima, mahima, vashati and prapti. And these four categories of people, vikarmis, karmis, jnanis and yogis, are missing one very important point. That is, they are pursuing pleasure for their own sense gratification. Because one may think that vikarmis are pursuing pleasure for their own sense gratification to gratify their senses. Karmis are also engaging in pursuit of pleasure through the religious literatures, through Vedic literatures, through what is so-called dharma. But how do we understand that jnanis and yogis are also in pursuit of pleasure? Because even the aspiration for moksha or liberation is self-centered. It is selfishly motivated, and therefore there is sense gratification involved. It is not a selfless endeavor. The endeavor for moksha is also not a selfless endeavor. It is an endeavor which is I-centered, and the endeavor for yogic siddhis is also I-centered. So therefore, vikarmis, karmis, jnanis and yogis, all their endeavors to attain pleasure become fruitless, because the secret of experiencing pleasure is not sense gratification, rather it is trying to please the senses of the Lord. So devotees are very intelligent people. The devotees, by engaging themselves in the loving devotional service of Supreme Lord, they not only please the Lord, by pleasing the Lord, the side effect of that is that they themselves are satisfied. Because yatha taror moola nishechanena triptyanti tatskanda bhujopashakam pranopacharam yatendriyanam tataiva sarvahanam achyuteja. Just by watering the root of the tree, all the leaves, all the branches, all the fruits and flowers of the tree are nourished. Similarly, by endeavoring to please Lord Krishna, all the living entities, including ourselves, can experience transcendental pleasure. So therefore, devotees are very intelligent, because devotees do not endeavor like vikarmis, karmis, jnanis and yogis with self-centered consciousness for experiencing pleasure. Rather, devotees engage themselves in the loving devotional service of the Lord, and a byproduct of that is that they experience transcendental happiness. And therefore, the cure for this pleasure, disease of pleasure seeking is to study Srimad Bhagavatam. All other Vedic literatures encourage this tendency to seek pleasure through dharma, artha, kama, and ultimately moksha. But Srimad Bhagavatam alone says, Dharmasya hi apavargasya anartho yascheha karmabhi. Which means Srimad Bhagavatam says, even religious duties should not be performed with the pursuit of sense gratification. Rather, they should be performed for pleasure of Lord Vishnu. So Srimad Bhagavatam again says in second chapter that all our religious duties are meant for pleasing the Lord. Dharma swanushtitah pumsam vishwaksena katasuya na utpadayed yadiratim shamayevahi kevalam. If the religious duties that we are pursuing, we are performing, do not help us awaken Krishna consciousness or greater attachment for the Supreme Lord, then all such religious duties are also simply waste of time. So Srimad Bhagavatam is outrightly rejecting the idea of pursuit of pleasure, even in religious way, even through the means of dharma, artha and kama. So in these two verses, Sanat Kumaras are saying that among dharma, artha, kama and moksha, one should endeavor for moksha. That is ultimate. So what kind of moksha should we endeavor for? Is it impersonal liberation? So this is where Srila Prabhupada's purports actually illuminate. So Srila Prabhupada's mood, although the verse says that one should endeavor for liberation, Srila Prabhupada makes it very clear the kind of liberation that one should endeavor for. It is not impersonal liberation where one merges into the Brahman. Impersonal liberation is like a child who is a naughty child who understands that this world is frustrated and therefore he wants to go back into the mother's womb. Because he does not want to experience the miseries of this world, so he wants to go back to the womb of the mother. Can the child go back to the womb of the mother? No, he cannot. So impersonalists are like these children who are frustrated with sense gratification and material enjoyment, that they want to merge into Brahman. Of course, Krishna can do that, but that is spiritual suicide. So what kind of liberation should devotees aspire for? Devotees should aspire for service to the Supreme Lord. Devotees should aspire for service to the Supreme Lord. And even if liberation is awarded to devotees without service to the Supreme Lord, devotees are not interested in such a liberation. Devotees are not interested in such a liberation. For example, Lord Kapila tells in Srimad Bhagavatam, Salokya sarishti samipya sarupyam ekattam apyuta dhiyamanam nagrinati vinamat sevanam jana. Devotees, even if they are not given impersonal liberation, but they are given liberation in Vaikuntha planets, wherein they can associate personally with the Lord in the same planet as Samipya, as Salokya Mukti, or they can serve the Supreme Lord intimately, or they can stay closer to the Supreme Lord as Samipya or Sarupya if they have the same form as the Supreme Lord, Chaturbhuja Vishnu Rupa, or Sarishti as the same opulence of the Supreme Lord. If this particular liberation, Salokya, Sarishti, Samipya and Sarupya are awarded to a devotee without service to the Supreme Lord, then the devotee is not interested in such a liberation, because the devotee is interested in serving the Supreme Lord. Atmendriya Pritivancha, sir, Atmendriya Triptivancha, Tare Bole Kam, Krishnendriya Pritivancha, Tare Bole Prem. So, a living entity, when it is endeavoring for satisfying its own senses, that is called lust. But when the living entity endeavors for satisfying the senses of the Supreme Lord, then the living entity is involving in loving devotional service to the Supreme Lord. So in this section, we've discussed that the Sanat Kumaras are telling Prithu Maharaj that simply head-on hedonistic understanding of pursuit of pleasure is very, very detrimental, because although every living entity is looking for pleasure, in the pursuit of pleasure, no living entity is ever successful in finding pleasure. Rather, they are finding pain coated with one layer of pleasure. We discussed about yei samsparshaja bhoga dukkayonyaiva evate adyantavanta kaunteya nateshu ramate buddha. So despite the fact that this pleasure is actually painful, the living entities continuously endeavor, and in their endeavor for pleasure, they experience pain, and they experience pleasure, that is so-called pleasure, that is temporary and which is illusory. But to purify this desire for pursuit of pleasure, the living entities through the Vedic literatures are given the system of purusharthas, that is dharma, artha, kama and moksha, wherein the living entity can perform religious duties with the pursuit of wealth through which one can satisfy the senses. But Srimad Bhagavatam even rejects this idea of purusharthas, because Srimad Bhagavatam says even the endeavor for religious principles is not for wealth, and wealth even accumulated is not for sense gratification, whereas religious duties performed or wealth accumulated or the desire for sense gratification should be directed towards liberation, which is apavarga, which is beyond the pavarga. Pavarga means parishram, the living entity endeavors like donkeys for sense gratification that is anyway available in any form of life. And due to the endeavor for parishram, the living entity experiences fena, which is foaming. And the living entity experiences bandhana to this world. And bhaya, of fear of losing this particular pleasure. And then ultimately mrityu. Pa, fa, ba, bha, ma. So this is pavarga. But the living entity who understands that religious duty should be performed not for sense gratification, but for something that is unattainable even in all the 14 planetary systems. That such a living entity is intelligent, and he aspires for that particular happiness that is present in liberation. But what kind of liberation do intelligent living entities pursue for? Not for impersonal liberation, rather the service of the Supreme Lord, which actually bestows so much transcendental happiness that even impersonal liberation looks pale. One of the aspects and characteristics of bhakti is moksha lagutakrit, which means that one devotee who is in the platform of bhava experiences so much transcendental happiness that even liberation, the happiness attained by liberation, looks very, very pale. So Srimad Bhagavatam outrightly rejects the idea of dharma, artha and kama moksha. But rather Srimad Bhagavatam is saying all of one's desires, all of one's activities, all of one's wealth, kaya, manasa, vacha, should be used in the service of the Supreme Lord, by which the purification of the tendency for hunting for pleasure can be purified in a very, very fast way. See, Vedic literatures give us dharma, artha, kama, moksha to purify our desire for sense gratification. But the process of purification of this desire for sense gratification through dharma, artha, kama, moksha takes many, many lifetimes. Because the living entity indulges in performing religious activities to attain wealth, and then again fulfill the sense gratification, goes to heavens. Then again, when his punya is depreciated, he comes back to this world and again involves in this process for multiple lifetimes. And when he is frustrated, he looks towards moksha. So it is a process that takes for many, many millions of lifetimes. But an intelligent person, when he endeavors not to satisfy his senses, as the karmis, jnanis, yogis or the vikarmis do, but he endeavors to satisfy the senses of the Lord, even though he has a desire for sense gratification. See, remember, this particular person or a devotee endeavoring in Krishna consciousness, not that he does not have the desire for sense gratification. He has the desire for sense gratification. But despite that desire, he prioritizes to please the Supreme Lord. Then what happens? Because he is prioritizing to please the Supreme Lord by the instructions of Guru, Vaishnavas and the spiritual master, what happens is that because he is endeavoring to please the Supreme Lord, by that process of trying to please the Supreme Lord, he will also experience happiness, and his desire to satisfy his senses also is purified. And therefore, devotional service is the fastest way by which the living entity can purify itself of this mad pursuit of sense gratification. And such a devotee can experience transcendental happiness. Happiness that cannot be attained by any amount of pursuit for sense gratification in this world. Because real happiness is actually in service to the Supreme Lord. Just like a man who is diving deep into the river to pluck mangoes. Can he ever pluck mangoes from the depth of the river? He will never be able to do. The mangoes are on the top of the tree, the reflection of which is in the river. So actual happiness is in the association of the Supreme Lord, in the service of the Supreme Lord. And only a pale reflection of that happiness exists in this world. And in pursuit of which the living entity actually gives all its effort, time, blood and sinew. Correct, right? In effort of such reflective happiness, it is anyway available for any form of species without any endeavor. But one should endeavor for that true happiness, which is attained not by prioritizing our sense gratification, but prioritizing the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. So when once the living entity understands this principle, that real happiness is attained in the service of the Supreme Lord, the living entity will never dare look upon satisfying his own senses. And this is what Yamunacharya says in his Stotratna, Yadavadi Macheta Krishna Padaram. Since the time I am involved deeply in devotional service and engaging in loving devotional service of you, Supreme Lord, whenever the thought of sense gratification comes to my mind, I spit upon the thought, considering it extremely insignificant. Why? Because Yamunacharya is experiencing such transcendental happiness. And this is very, very rarely mentioned in any Vedic literature. If we see all the other Vedic literatures encourage the living entity's pursuit for sense gratification through the process of dharma, artha, kama and moksha. But only Srimad Bhagavatam says dharma projita kaitavotra paramo nirmatsaranam satanu. Srimad Bhagavatam roots out these false religions where dharma is encouraged for accumulating wealth and wealth is used for sense gratification, and the living entity is entangled in that cycle of pursuit of sense gratification for many, many millions of lifetimes. So that is why Srimad Bhagavatam is glorified. And that is the beauty of Srila Prabhupada's purports, where Srila Prabhupada is clearly mentioning that even in terms of liberation, the kind of liberation that we should pursue is not for impersonal liberation, which is devoid of the service of the Supreme Lord. We should pursue for that kind of liberation where the living entity is engaging in loving devotional service to the Supreme Lord. In fact, the devotees are not interested in liberation also. Because even in the pursuit of liberation, as we discussed, there is some amount of self-centeredness. So the devotee is interested only in pleasing the Lord. And the byproduct of pleasing the Lord is happiness for the devotee also, and the liberation from the modes of material nature. But the devotee is not interested in liberation. The devotee is interested in performing pure devotional service. That is why we see devotees such as Prahlad Maharaj and Srila Prabhupada also desire to preach extensively without consideration of whether I want to go home back to Godhead or not. Prahlad Maharaj is saying, until the last living entity stays in this universe, I want to stay to preach them to come home back to Godhead. So many Srila Prabhupada's disciples also say that I want my next, I'm not interested in the next destination being the kingdom of God, being the going back home back to Godhead. Rather, I want to go to that place where Srila Prabhupada is serving his spiritual master in preaching the mission of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. I want to go to that particular place where Srila Prabhupada is serving, so that I can get association with Srila Prabhupada and serve Srila Prabhupada. So this desire is greater than the desire of liberation, because the devotee is not interested in liberation, which is devoid of service. Rather, the devotee is interested in loving devotional service to the Supreme Lord, even if it is meant in hellish planets. Such is the glory of devotional service, where even people who are selfishly motivated can be purified of all their selfish motivational desires, which is not possible through the process of dharma, artha, kama, moksha, even after many, many millions of lifetimes. So Sanat Kumaras are elaborating in this section to Prithu Maharaj that mere hedonistic pursuit of sense gratification is not at all appreciated, which is driven by the modes of material nature. For in human society, intelligent people should aspire for something that is best among these four, that is liberation. But Srila Prabhupada clearly says that the liberation that devotee should aspire for is actually the service of the Lord, without any desire for one's own deliverance from the material world. That is the highest form of love, because the Vikarmis, Karmis, Jnanis, and Yogis, in all their endeavors, some tinge of sense gratification is present. But only devotees are free from such sense gratificatory desires, wherein devotees are selflessly able to render service to the Supreme Lord. And this we see in the life of Srila Prabhupada. How at the age of 70 years, Srila Prabhupada actually left Vrindavan Dham to preach the message of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in places which were unheard, in foreign countries, in Western countries. So Srila Prabhupada took this endeavor. So Srila Prabhupada literally is showing by his example that he is leaving, although Srila Prabhupada physically left Vrindavan, he never left Vrindavan. Because Srila Prabhupada's heart is a place where Lord Krishna ultimately stays, and wherever Srila Prabhupada went, Srila Prabhupada carried Vrindavan with him. And such is the nature of a pure devotee, because a devotee does not desire for anything from the Supreme Lord, does not desire for any sense gratification, not even liberation. The Supreme Lord gives himself to such a devotee. And this is the glory of the process of devotional service that Sanat Kumaras are elaborating to Prithu Maharaj. So with this, I conclude these two verses, verse number 34 and 35 from the 22nd chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th canto. So if devotees have any questions or comments, devotees may feel free to ask.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Danda Pranam.
Hare
Thanks
Krishna
for
Prabhuji.
thanks for a very, very wonderful class, Prabhuji. Very nicely explained and very authoritative and very nice, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, my question is like, see, we as we're saying, we look, all the living entities are back for pleasures, like they need pleasures, they are running for pleasure. What is real happiness? Like when we say it's real happiness, and when we say chant Hare Krishna and be happy, why is that even if we chant Hare Krishna, one doesn't feel that happiness? Just highlight.
Yes, Prabhuji. So one sometimes experience that even when we are endeavoring to chant, it sometimes appears that we are not feeling happiness. Why? Because whether in knowledge or in ignorance, we are committing offenses. If a devotee chants holy name in the platform of Namabhas, which means not Shuddha Nam, in Namabhas, without Namaprad, then such a devotee actually is already in the platform of liberation. For such a devotee, his prarabdha is already cleared off. So such a devotee can experience. But because we, in knowledge or in ignorance, inadvertently commit offenses towards Vaishnavas, towards holy name due to inattentiveness, what happens is that we cannot experience transcendental happiness. And even when we are chanting, we should not endeavor for the pleasure from chanting. The act of chanting or glorification of the holy name of the Supreme Lord is meant for pleasing the Supreme Lord. So when our desire is to please Hari, Guru and Vaishnavas, by actually endeavoring to please them, we will naturally experience happiness. But when we endeavor to please ourselves through the process, see, sometimes what happens, we do not do material activities to satisfy ourselves. We try to do spiritual activities with an intention for sense gratification. For example, sometimes we try to read Srimad Bhagavatam with a desire to actually call ourselves knowledgeable people, call ourselves very scholarly people. So, we are involving in a spiritual activity, but the desire for doing the spiritual activity is actually materially motivated. And because of that materially motivated desires, we are not getting the greatest benefit that actually the performance of the spiritual activity actually intends. So even when we are chanting the holy name of the Supreme Lord, if our desire is not to please the Supreme Lord or not to please Hari, Guru and Vaishnavas, then the act of chanting the holy name of the Supreme Lord is not pleasurable to the Supreme Lord. So therefore, that cannot give us pleasure also, and that cannot give us happiness also or satisfaction also. But when we endeavor to chant without offenses for the pleasure of the Supreme Lord, see, in Bhagavad Gita also Lord Krishna says, one should do sadhana bhakti with a desire to attain the Supreme Lord, with a desire to please the Supreme Lord. Not that one should simply engage in sadhana bhakti. One should do sadhana bhakti, but with a desire to attain the Supreme Lord. So when that desire is very, very strong, then what happens? The devotee does not care for whether he is experiencing happiness or not. Although he definitely experiences happiness in the service to the Supreme Lord, his primary concern is not his own happiness. rather the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. So therefore, when we are chanting and when we are not experiencing happiness, we should understand that we have either committed offenses or our goal is misdirected for our own pleasure rather than directing it for the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. This is my understanding, Prabhuji. Does that answer your
Yeah, thank
question, Prabhuji?
you. Yes, Prabhuji. So, just to understand, like, well, then what is real happiness, Prabhuji?
So real happiness, see, actually, Prabhuji, when we engage in spiritual activities, chanting of the holy name in association of devotees, at our stage, we are experiencing something called as um, there are 6 stages of characteristics of devotional service, and the first is Shubhada. Hmm. In Shubhada, the living entity actually experiences happiness, relief from all material distress. Hmm. And in the stage of Bhava, the living entity experiences happiness that is superior to the happiness that is experienced in Brahmananda or in impersonal liberation. And in the stage of Karma, the living entity experiences ultimate happiness, Sandrananda Visheshatma. But for us to experience that happiness currently is not possible because we are in the initial stages of sadhana bhakti. Hmm? So, what we should think real happiness is actually in the service of the Supreme Lord. Actually, devotee does not endeavor for any happiness. For a devotee, happiness means to please Krishna. The definition of happiness for a devotee means to please Hari, Guru, and Vaishnava. So, this is actual happiness for a devotee. Even if apparently he is experiencing physical difficulties. We see many disciples of Srila Prabhupada have so many bodily complications. But are they not experiencing transcendental happiness in service to the Supreme Lord? They are experiencing transcendental happiness in service to the Supreme Lord, although they are physically sometimes incapable physically or having physical problems. Why it is? Because their definition of happiness is not self-centered. Is not that I am situated in a comfortable position. The definition of happiness is how can I please Hari, Guru, and Vaishnavas. So for a devotee, real happiness means to please the Supreme Lord. And in pleasure of the Supreme Lord, the devotee experiences happiness. So for us, happiness is not in pursuit of sense gratification. For us, happiness is not in pursuit of mundane philosophical speculation. For us, happiness is not in uh, pursuit of even fulfilling our material desires. For devotees, the standard of a devotee is happiness means to engage in loving devotional service of Supreme Lord. Because real happiness comes from service to the Supreme Lord. I'll give you an example, Prabhuji. Take an example of when you have selflessly rendered service to a particular Vaishnava without any expectation and the satisfaction that you have felt in your heart. So that is a glimpse of real happiness because at that particular moment, we're not speaking about the entire thing, but at that particular moment, when you desire to please that particular Vaishnava and engage yourself in activities that are physically toiling, although it is difficult for you to do, but you engage such activities for the pleasure of another Vaishnava, the satisfaction that you experiences in your heart, which is actually arising from blessings of such Vaishnava, that is a glimpse of the happiness, spiritual happiness that you can actually experience. So when we define happiness in terms of what is pleasing to the Supreme Lord. Because a devotee is the only one. See, Vikarmis, Karmis, Jnanis, and Yogis all are pursuing happiness. But a devotee is not looking for happiness. Devotee is looking for pleasing the source of happiness. That is the Supreme Lord. And therefore, because he endeavors to please the Supreme Lord, who is the source of happiness, he naturally experiences happiness. Although he is not looking for such happiness. I don't know if I provided any justification for the
Yeah,
question that
yeah,
you asked, Prabhuji.
very much justified, Prabhuji. Very much, very nicely justified. Thanks a lot, Prabhuji. Thanks a lot. Hare Krishna, Danda Pranam. Jai, Jai.
Hare Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji, thank you very much. Hare.
Any other questions by any other devotees? Okay. So I seek the blessings of all Vaishnavas so that I understand the message of Srimad Bhagavatam and live up to the purports of Srila Prabhupada and engage in loving devotional service under the instructions of my spiritual master. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavibhyo namo namah. अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय, श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय, ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की